Hello and welcome back. This will be a video on factoring in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. There is a PDF available for download. And in that PDF you'll see the 6 simple steps that I've created to factor that form. First thing we're going to do is show you what factoring is supposed to undo. We're going to first multiply our first terms. 2n times 3n is going to give you a 6n squared. That's the f. Then we're going to multiply our outer terms. 2n times a negative 5 is going to give you a negative 10n. That's the o. Then we're going to multiply the 4 and the 3n. That's going to give us a positive 12n. That's the I for inner. And then we're going to multiply the last two terms, the 4 and the negative 5, and that's going to give us a negative 20, and that's our L. And that's where our FOIL comes from, F-O-I-L, 4 terms, or four multiplications, 4 product. The 2 in the middle, the O and the I, will add up to a positive 2n, and then I just bring down my 6n squared, and my minus 20 will also come down. So I still have an F here and L here, but the middle term is actually O plus I combined. So what we're going to try and do is take this number and work backwards to that. And that's what factoring is all about. A couple of quick hints here. If you see a trinomial that has 2 positive c values, you're going to have 2 factors with the same sign. And the sign of those factors will depend on what this middle term is. If it's a plus in the middle, then the 2 factors will be positive. If it's a minus in the middle, then the 2 factors will both be negative. If you see the c term is actually a negative or minus, then you'll have 2 factors again with different signs. And what that means is one of them will be positive and one of them will be negative. If you look at the middle term again, whatever that sign is, the bigger factor goes with that sign. So if it's a plus, it'll be a positive number for the bigger factor. If it's a minus, the bigger factor will be a negative. So we're going to take that example of 6n squared plus 2n minus 20, and we're going to work it backwards. And we can see up here we already know what the answer is supposed to be. Step 1 is to pre-simplify. Now you don't have to do step 1. I like to do it just to work with smaller numbers. So pre-simplify means look at your coefficients and your constant, and is there any common factor that you can divide out before you start to factor? Well, it turns out that they all have a 2 in common. So I'm going to factor out a 2. What's left over is going to be 3n squared plus n minus 10. Now this 2 that's out in front, I'm not going to write it down each time. I'm going to put it out to the side here, and when I get to the end I'm going to bring it down because I don't need it when I'm doing my factoring process. All I need is what's inside here. Okay, so the next step is to take the a value and times it by c. Well, the a is a 3, the b here is a 1, and the c value is a negative 10. So a times c is going to give us negative 30. The next thing we have to do is take that negative 30 and list the factors that will add up to the positive 1 for b value. So whatever I get here, these 2 factors have to add up to a positive 1. Okay, so the factors of 30 that can make a 1 would be a 6 and a 5. So I'm going to put a 6 and I'm going to put a 5. Now remember, this sign right here is negative, which means my signs have to be opposites. That means one of these numbers, the 6 or the 5, has to be a negative and the other one has to be a positive. And if I look at my middle term is positive. What that's telling me is my bigger of the 2 factors has to be positive, which means my 6 has to be positive and my 5 has to be negative. So 6 plus a negative 5 will still make a positive 1, but when multiplied together will still give me a negative 30. So those are the 2 factors I'm going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do this. I'm going to take that 6 and I'm going to take that negative 5 and I'm going to attach an n to both of them because I can make a 1n by using 6n minus 5n. That's my O and my I for my original FOIL. All I got to do now is bring down my F and my L terms, which are going to be a 3n squared, that was a positive, and a minus 10. The next step is to group these, the front two and the back two. And then I'm going to find the GCF of each group. This first group here has a greatest common factor of 3n. So I'm going to factor out a 3n on it. This next group here has a greatest common factor of -5, so I'm going to factor out a -5. Now I got to determine what's left over inside after I factor the -5. Well, the first one I'll have an n and a +2 left over. And the second one I'll have an n and a +2 also. And we'll notice that we have two terms here that have another factor in common. So I'm going to go and factor one more time. I'm going to factor the n +2 out of the problem. And when I do that, this disappears, leaving 3n minus 5. 3n minus 5 is my second term. And the only thing I got to remember to do is bring down my 2. So my fully factored form would be 2 times n plus 2 times 3n minus 5. If I want to make sure that that is correct, I can multiply this whole thing out and check back to see that this is what it was up here. Next example, 2n squared minus 3n minus 35. Well, the first thing I'm going to look for is pre-simplifying. Are there any factors in common? 2, 3, and 35. They have none, so I can go on to the next one. And I want to do an a times a c. So a c is going to give me a -70. So 2 times -35 is -70. So I want to list the factors of -70 that will add up to a -3. And the two factors that come to mind are 10 and 7. So I'm going to put a 10 and I'm going to put a 7. Now, since this is a negative here, I know that one of these two factors has to be a negative and one has to be a positive. And since this is a negative right here, that's telling me that the bigger factor has to be negative. So I have to have a -10. So I'm going to take these two numbers and I'm going to split the 3 into -10n and a +7n. So when I add those together, I would actually get the -3 back again. Bring the rest of the problem down, -35 and 2n squared. Now I have my F, O, I, and L. The next thing I need to do is group them together, the first two and the last two. Now find the greatest common factor of the first group. The greatest common factor here is going to be a 2n. And I'll put my parentheses there. And I'm going to go ahead and divide that out. So 2n squared divided by 2n is going to leave me with n minus 5. In my second group, my greatest common factor is going to be a +7. So +7. And then I got to factor that out, and what's left over stays in the parentheses. So I'll have an n minus 5. And you'll start to notice that if I get to this point where I have two of the same terms in parentheses, I'm doing something correct. But I still have to factor out one more time. These two terms have an n minus 5 in common, so I'm going to factor n minus 5 out again. So basically, I'm dividing by n minus 5 and an n minus 5 here. These will cancel out, leaving 2n plus 7 is the other factor, 2n plus 7. And those are the two factors that started, which created that trinomial. Last example, 6n squared minus 15n is equal to 99. Well, the first problem I see with this is it's not equal to 0. In order to factor a quadratic, you have to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 99 from both sides and rewrite the problem. 6n squared minus 15n minus 99 is now equal to 0. So I just minus 99 from both sides of the problem. Next thing we're going to do is pre-simplify. Look at all three numbers, 6, 15, and 99, and it appears they all have a 3 in common. So I'm going to factor out a 3 just to make the numbers simpler and smaller to work with. And I'll have a 2n squared minus 5n and minus 33 The whole thing is still equal to 0. Remember, this factor on the outside, I don't really need to bring it down each time, so I'm going to wait to the very end to bring it down. So I'm just going to move it out of the way. All right, so this is my A value, this is my B value, this is my C value. So A times C is 2 times negative 33. So AC is going to give me a negative 66. Now I got to come up with the factors of negative 66 that will still make a negative 5 when added up. So factors of 66, you could have 6 and 11. And 6 and 11 appear to be a difference of 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put those down. 11 and 6. And since this is a negative here, that means one of these signs has to be negative. This here tells me that the bigger of the two is negative, so it's a negative 11 and a positive 6. So I'm going to break that negative 5 down into negative 11n plus 6n. And then I'm going to just bring the rest of the problem down, my minus 33 and my 2n squared. Next thing, group them together and factor out a GCF. Well, this first one here has a GCF of, it appears to be n, so I factor out an n, and I have a 2n minus 11 left over. And this next one here appears to have a factor of 3, so I'm going to factor out a positive 3. And I will have a 2n minus 11 left over again. At this point, you can see that these two terms still have a common factor of 2n minus 11. So I'm going to factor that binomial out again. So 2n minus 11. And what's left over after these cancel each other out through factoring is an n plus 3. And then all I got to do is remember to bring my 3 down. And the full factor form would be this.